As always, I'm going to do this lesson as a supplement to the other things that are available to you for writing your informative essay. And when I say essay, please understand this is a scholarly essay and not just sort of a collection of your thoughts. And so I'm going to go into some detail about what that means. But this is supplemental to reading your textbook and reading the samples and doing the other work available through Canvas and through the other sources that I make available to you. So be sure to go beyond just watching this lesson. I provide my picture here for one purpose, and that is to remind you that there is an actual human being behind these lessons and keeping in touch with you. And so this is real people, real students, real teachers doing real stuff. Okay, so first of all, a basic overview of what we're talking about when we refer to an informative essay or expository essay. First of all, it's based on facts and observations. So there are other kinds of writing when we're going to get into more persuasion and analysis. This is really to lay out information, the facts about something, to help someone get an overview of a thing. And it can be pretty much any topic that you want. Some students find it frustrating that I don't provide them a topic or narrow down the topic. Most students prefer to be able to choose something, and so I've had students write papers or do presentations, informative presentations and papers on everything from the history of the tire to various kinds of treatments for diseases. We have a lot of nursing students at CEI, and so there is often I get a lot of papers and presentations on health-related matters. Perfectly great. So it's basically to help someone get a better understanding on a topic or issue. It needs to flow logically from one idea to another. You start with an introduction and a thesis statement. Thesis statements are explained in another lesson and discussed in detail in the textbook. And then go from point to point. Probably some of you are familiar with the term the 5-paragraph essay. And this is similar to the 5-paragraph essay. Typically, where we're talking about the length of this kind of an essay, I want it to be no fewer than 500 words, and so it might be more than 5 paragraphs, but the idea is to go introduction, transition, point 1, transition, point 2, and then draw your conclusion. You need to get into some detail. This is where a lot of folks get into trouble, where they provide just a generic overview of something which doesn't really indicate to me or to your other readers or listeners or viewers that you really did additional research. Now, I don't want you to obsess over getting into the weeds either. So you need to provide enough detail to where you're giving us more than just general knowledge, but you also need to stick to 500 or 600 words. And this is not a persuasive or an opinion piece. So you're not going to insert your perspective or your bias or your point of view here. We will do that later, but not for this one. So that's a basic overview. As I said, go into the textbook and get more detail on what we're talking about here. As I've already suggested, it needs to flow. So you start with your introduction, which can be, or at least it needs to include, your thesis statement. Understand what a thesis statement is. Write a clean, clear thesis statement. Introduce your topic. And then, rather than just going sort of jarringly from that to your first point, come up with a transition. And it basically is linking one paragraph to the next in the opening sentence of that next paragraph. It is not complicated. You just need to use words that will link where you are to where you're going. And there are many ways to go about that. And then you make your point, you maybe another transition, you make another point. This is a fairly short paper, no more than 500 or 600 words, and so you don't need more than 2 or 3 main points, and then you get down to your conclusion, which is more or less, in some ways, a summary. You go back to your introduction, but you confirm, you provide a summary of the information that you've given. You don't want to just repeat it, but summarize it neatly so that if someone were to just have time to read your conclusion, they would get it. They would have a good idea of the information that you provided in this paper. Okay, some general ideas here on how to put this together and some tips to make it a little easier. First of all, pick something generally, if you can, pick something that you're interested in or you have some knowledge about, so you're not starting from scratch. The danger there is, don't just tell us what you already know. You've got to do the additional research. And so you've got to include at least 3 sources, at least one of which has to be a scholarly source. And I talk about scholarly sources and other credible sources in another lesson. Make sure you understand what I'm talking about there and you use them appropriately in this paper. Because it's an academic paper, it doesn't mean it's got to be dry and boring. You can inject a little bit of yourself into it, write in a clean manner in which you are expressing yourself. Just avoid, for this kind of a paper, you're going to avoid inserting your bias or opinions, but use an anecdote or use an example to help humanize the information that you're providing. So it doesn't. I mean, if you don't do that, it's going to be fine. But write in a way that you would want to read the paper, so that it draws you in. You don't have to be a spectacular writer, but try not to be so academic that it just it doesn't have a little snap. And whenever possible, use active voice, not passive voice. If you're not sure what that means, go to Grammarly or go to the Purdue OWL website and look up active voice versus passive voice. Whenever possible, use very specific verbs and nouns instead of verbs and nouns that are modified with adjectives and adverbs. Again, if you're not sure what I'm talking about, A, I'm happy to talk with you individually, but B, just instead of using a modifier and a noun, for example, very good, the same thing can be said with the word great. So that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Wherever possible, use very specific nouns and verbs. This is something that you should have at least been introduced to in English 101 and in other writing courses. Here are the 4 most common errors I see in this kind of paper. First of all, it's too generic. You gotta dig a little bit and get specific. Second of all, I see a lot of style and format errors. We're using different styles in this course. This is an MLA style. You need to really understand what MLA requires and follow it. We're going to do an APA format for the next paper. That's an entirely different style and it requires a different approach. There are lots of places to go to get help. I've provided you a lesson on using the online writing lab at Purdue University. It's a great place to go. There are other places to go, and you can get assistance with mentors at College of Eastern Idaho. If you want to connect with someone there who can help you with some of the basics, just let me know. The other thing I often see is just basic spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And really, there's not an excuse for that. You can run it through a grammar check, a spell check. You've got all of these tools available to you. Use them. There's really never any reason to have a spelling, punctuation, or grammar error. And finally, I often see just research sources that are weak. For example, in my public speaking courses, in one of the assignments, which is talking about a holiday, I have banned the use of history.com, which is basically a television show with a website. It's just a generic, basic, not good enough research source for these purposes. So watch my lesson on how to do research and what is a credible and scholarly source and what is not. I'm not going to read this to you, but this is just a copy and paste of the assignment that is already in Canvas. This describes what the assignment specifically is. So if you haven't yet looked it over, pause the video here and review what the assignment specifically is. Again, it's described in detail, the same detail here on Canvas. If you have questions about anything I'm referring to here or what I mean here, you're always welcome to reach out. But here's what the assignment is. And if you do the necessary work, if you watch the lessons, if you read the textbook, this is not a difficult assignment.